My mechanic called me at 11 o'clock at night and said 6 words that should have saved my life. "Don't drive your car tomorrow. Please." His voice was shaking. Oscar had been working on cars for 40 years, and I had never heard him sound scared before. He told me something was wrong, that he needed to show me something in person, that I should find another way to get to work in the morning. I thanked him for his concern and told him I would be fine. Then I hung up the phone, walked back to my bedroom, and fell asleep next to the man who had tried to kill me. My name is Jenna. I am 28 years old, and 8 months ago, I nearly died on a mountain road in western North Carolina because I ignored the one person who was paying attention. My brakes failed on a steep downhill curve going 40 miles an hour. The pedal went straight to the floor, like it was not connected to anything. I had about 4 seconds to decide how I wanted to die, and by some miracle, I chose the option that let me survive. The police found cut brake lines, clean cuts, deliberate, made by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone had crawled under my car in the middle of the night and made sure that the next time I drove down that mountain, I would not make it to the bottom. I knew who did it before the detective even started asking questions. I knew because of an email I had seen on his laptop 3 days earlier. I knew because of the life insurance policy he had convinced me to sign 6 months before. I knew because my sister Nadine had been warning me about him for 2 years, and I had been too blind and too in love to listen. His name was Wesley. He was my boyfriend. He told me he loved me almost every day, and he tried to murder me for $300,000 and a chance to start over with the woman he had actually been dating the entire time. The only reason I am alive to tell this story is because a 63-year-old mechanic named Oscar noticed something wrong and cared enough to call me at 11 o'clock at night. I did not listen to him, but his warning was still in my head the next morning when my car started racing toward that curve, and it was his voice I heard telling me to steer into the embankment instead of trying to make the turn. He saved my life with a phone call I almost ignored. Subscribe for more stories and tell me where you're watching from. I grew up in Ashford, a small mountain town about an hour west of Asheville, where everyone knows everyone and news travels faster than cell service. My parents divorced when I was 12. My father moved to Florida and started a new family. My mother stayed and raised me and my older sister Nadine on her own, while working double shifts as a nurse at the regional hospital. We never had much money, but we had a warm house, food on the table, and a mother who showed up for every school play and softball game, no matter how tired she was. Nadine is 4 years older than me. She has always been the practical one, the careful one, the sister who reads contracts before signing them and checks the expiration dates on everything in the refrigerator. I used to think she was too cautious, too suspicious of everyone. She thought I was too trusting, too eager to see the best in people, even when they did not deserve it. We argued about this our entire lives. She was right. I just did not know it yet. I work as a veterinary technician at Ashford Animal Hospital. I have been there for 6 years, ever since I finished my certification program at the community college. I love my job more than I ever expected to love anything. I love the dogs who come in scared and leave wagging their tails. I love the cats who pretend they hate everyone but purr when you scratch behind their ears. I love being able to help animals who cannot tell us what hurts and what they need. The pay is not great, but it is enough. I rented a small cottage on the edge of town, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and felt proud of the simple life I had built for myself. I met Wesley at a fundraiser for the animal hospital 2 years ago. He was there representing his financial advising firm, one of the sponsors of the event. He was tall, well-dressed, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He asked me questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He remembered the names of the animals I mentioned and brought them up again weeks later. He was charming in a way that felt natural, not practiced. Our first date was dinner at a nice restaurant in Asheville. He held doors open for me, asked about my family, and insisted on paying even when I offered to split the check. By the end of the night, I felt like I had known him for years. By the end of the month, I was falling in love with him. Wesley worked as a financial advisor at a firm in the next town over. He drove a nice car, wore expensive watches, and always seemed to have money for dinners out and weekend trips. He was the kind of man I never thought would be interested in someone like me. When he told me I was beautiful, when he said he could see a future with me, I believed him because I wanted it to be true. Within 6 months, Wesley had a key to my cottage. He started staying over most nights, cooking dinner in my kitchen, leaving his clothes in my closet. He talked about us moving in together, maybe buying a house, maybe starting a family someday. He convinced me to let him manage my savings account, saying he could get me better returns than my local bank. He added himself as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy, explaining that serious couples should plan for the future together. I gave him access to everything because I trusted him completely. The only person who did not trust him was Nadine. She said there was something off about Wesley from the first time she met him. She said his smile did not reach his eyes. She noticed that he always wanted to know where I was going, who I was meeting, when I would be home. She pointed out that I had stopped seeing my friends as often, that I always had an excuse to cancel plans, that Wesley seemed to have opinions about everyone in my life, and those opinions were never positive. I told her she was being paranoid. I told her she was jealous because she was single, and I was finally happy. We had the worst fight of our lives over Wesley. She said I was blind. I said she was bitter. We did not speak for almost a month after that. When we finally made up, we both agreed not to talk about Wesley anymore. I thought I had won that argument. I did not realize that Nadine had simply decided to wait for me to see the truth myself. Oscar Benitez has been my mechanic since I bought my Honda 7 years ago. He runs a small shop on the outskirts of town with his son Marco. The building is old and the sign is faded, but the work is honest and the prices are fair. Oscar is 63 years old, a quiet man with gray hair and rough hands who served in the army before moving to Ashford when he retired. He has never tried to sell me a repair I did not need. He explains everything in plain language and treats me like an adult who can understand how her own car works. I trusted Oscar completely, even more than I trusted Wesley, though I did not realize it at the time. 1 week before the accident, I brought my car to Oscar for a routine oil change. Wesley had offered to take it to a shop near his office instead, saying it would be more convenient for me. I told him I preferred Oscar. Wesley seemed annoyed, but did not push the issue. I dropped my car off at the shop on a Monday morning and picked it up that afternoon. Everything seemed normal. Oscar said my car was in good shape and I should not have any problems. I did not know that 3 days later, someone would crawl under my car in the middle of the night and cut the brake lines. I did not know that Wesley had been watching Oscar's shop, waiting for the right moment. And I did not know that the man I loved was counting down the days until I died on a mountain road, and he collected the insurance money. But Oscar knew something was wrong. He just could not prove it yet. In the weeks before the accident, Wesley started acting like a different person. The charming, attentive boyfriend who used to bring me coffee and ask about my day was gone. In his place was someone distracted and irritable, someone who checked his phone every few minutes and took calls in another room with the door closed. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he snapped at me and said I was being nosy. He apologized an hour later and blamed stress from a difficult client, but the damage was done. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I noticed that his stories did not always add up. He said he was working late one Tuesday, but when I drove past his office on my way home from the grocery store, his car was not in the parking lot. He said he had dinner with a colleague named Marcus on Thursday, but he came home smelling like a perfume I did not recognize, something floral and expensive that was nothing like the cologne he usually wore. I asked him about it casually, and he said Marcus's wife had hugged him goodbye. The explanation made sense. I wanted to believe it, but something in my gut told me I was being lied to. 4 days before the accident, I found the email that changed everything. Wesley had left his laptop open on my kitchen table while he was in the shower. I was not looking for anything. I was just walking past on my way to make coffee when I saw my own name on the screen. The email was already open, a message to someone named Kristen, and my eyes caught the words before I could stop myself. The Jenna situation is almost handled. I'll have access to everything within the month. Then we can finally be together the way we planned. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I did not understand what access to everything meant, but I knew it was not good. I knew that whatever Wesley was planning, I was not supposed to find out about it. I heard the shower turn off. I walked away from the laptop and stood by the coffee maker, trying to control my breathing, trying to arrange my face into something normal. When Wesley came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, I asked him who Kristen was. He did not hesitate. He smiled and said she was a client, that the email was about a financial account belonging to a different Jenna, that it was a common name and I was reading too much into it. He walked over to me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. You're being paranoid, babe, just like your sister. I love you. You know that. I wanted to believe him so badly that I let it go. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself that 2 years of happiness could not be a lie. I pushed the email out of my mind and pretended everything was fine. But that night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed next to Wesley and thought about all the ways he had woven himself into my life. He managed my savings account. He was the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. He knew my passwords, my PIN numbers, my social security number. He had access to everything I owned. If something happened to me, he would inherit all of it. 3 days before the accident, my car started making a strange sound when I pressed the brakes. It was a high-pitched whine that I had never heard before. I called Oscar and described it over the phone. His voice got serious immediately. Bring it in today if you can. Brake noises are not something to ignore. I dropped the car off that afternoon. Wesley insisted on driving me to the shop and waiting in the parking lot while I talked to Oscar inside. He asked a lot of questions about what Oscar was checking and how long the repairs would take. At the time, I thought he was just being helpful. Now I know he was making sure he understood the timeline. Oscar called me the next day and said my car was ready. He had found the problem and fixed it. Something about a worn brake pad that needed replacing. But his voice sounded strange, hesitant, in a way I had never heard from him before. Miss Jenna, when you come to pick up the car, can you come alone? I need to talk to you about something. I told him I would come after work, but Wesley volunteered to drive me again, and I did not think of a good excuse to say no. He waited in the parking lot while I went inside, and Oscar handed me my keys without saying anything unusual. His eyes kept darting toward the window where Wesley's car was visible. Whatever he wanted to tell me, he could not say it with Wesley watching. That night, at 11 o'clock, my phone rang. Wesley was already asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. I slipped out of bed and answered the call in the bathroom with the door closed. Oscar's voice was low and urgent. Miss Jenna, please listen to me. Don't drive your car tomorrow. Something isn't right. I need to show you something, but I can't explain over the phone. Can you come to the shop first thing in the morning? I asked him what was wrong. He said he could not be sure yet, that he did not want to make accusations without proof. He sounded scared. I told him I had to work early and could not come until afternoon. He begged me to find another ride to work. He said it was important. He said please. I thanked him for his concern. I told him I would be careful. And then I hung up the phone and went back to bed, convinced that a 63-year-old mechanic was overreacting about nothing. I fell asleep next to Wesley within minutes. I had no idea that in 8 hours I would be fighting for my life on a mountain road, because I did not listen to the one person who was trying to save me. I left for work at 7:30 the next morning. Wesley was still in bed when I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. He mumbled something about having a late meeting and said he would call me later. I kissed him on the forehead and told him I loved him. He said it back without opening his eyes. Those were the last words we ever exchanged as a couple. The drive to the animal hospital takes about 20 minutes on a winding mountain road that cuts through the hills east of town. I had driven that route hundreds of times, so many times that I could do it without thinking. The road climbs for the first few miles, then crests a ridge and drops down a long, steep grade with 3 sharp curves before leveling out near the hospital. In good weather, it is a beautiful drive. In bad weather or bad conditions, it can be dangerous. That morning, the sky was clear and the road was dry. The danger was under my hood, waiting for me. I crested the ridge at exactly 7:43. I know because I glanced at the clock on my dashboard right before everything went wrong. The road tilted downward, and my car began to pick up speed. I pressed the brake pedal to slow down for the first curve. Nothing happened. The pedal went straight to the floor like it was not connected to anything. There was no resistance, no pressure, no response from the car at all. I pumped the brakes again and again, pushing the pedal down as hard as I could. Nothing. My speedometer climbed from 35 to 40 to 45 as gravity pulled me down the hill toward a curve I could not possibly make at that speed. I had maybe 4 seconds to decide what to do. The curve ahead had a metal guardrail and a 50-foot drop on the other side. If I tried to make the turn, I would crash through the barrier and go over the edge. If I did nothing, the same thing would happen. My only other option was the embankment on the inside of the curve, a steep wall of dirt and rock that would destroy my car, but might stop it before I went over. Oscar's voice came into my head. Don't drive your car tomorrow. Something isn't right. I yanked the steering wheel to the right and aimed directly at the embankment. The impact was violent and instant. My airbag exploded in my face as the front of my car crumpled against the dirt and rock. Glass shattered around me. The car spun sideways and tipped at an angle, the passenger side lifting off the ground before slamming back down. My seatbelt locked tight across my chest, and I felt something in my left wrist snap. Then everything went quiet. I do not know how long I sat there before I could think clearly again. It might have been seconds. It might have been minutes. My face was pressed against a deflated airbag that smelled like chemicals and smoke. Blood ran down my forehead and dripped onto my shirt. My left wrist was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn, but I could move my legs. I could feel my fingers. I was alive. I found my phone on the floor of the passenger side and called 911 with my right hand. The dispatcher asked me where I was and what happened. I told her I was on Mountain Ridge Road and my brakes had failed. She said help was on the way and told me to stay in the car and not move. I sat there in the wreckage and waited. Through the cracked windshield, I could see the curve I had been heading toward. I could see the guardrail and the empty sky beyond it. If I had tried to make that turn, I would be at the bottom of a ravine right now. I would be dead. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. The paramedics pulled me out of the car carefully and strapped me to a stretcher. They asked me questions to check if I was coherent. I answered all of them correctly. One of them looked at my car and shook his head. You're lucky to be alive. That embankment saved you. I did not feel lucky. I felt confused and scared and angry. My brakes had been working fine the day before. Oscar had fixed them himself. There was no reason for them to fail completely overnight, unless someone had made them fail on purpose. At the hospital, they x-rayed my wrist and confirmed it was broken in 2 places. They stitched up the gash on my forehead and checked me for internal bleeding. The doctor said I had a concussion and needed to stay overnight for observation. I lay in that hospital bed alone, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. Oscar arrived at 4 o'clock that afternoon. He stood in the doorway of my room, looking like he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His face was gray and his hands were trembling. I tried to warn you, he said. I found it yesterday when I put your car on the lift to double-check my work. Someone cut your brake lines. The cuts were clean and deliberate, made with a sharp tool by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This was not an accident, Miss Jenna. Someone tried to kill you. He had taken photographs before he fixed the lines the first time. He had saved the damaged parts in a plastic bag as evidence. He said he was going to call the police that morning, but wanted to talk to me first. He blamed himself for not doing more, for not driving to my house and taking my keys away. I told him it was not his fault. I told him I should have listened. And then I asked him to take his evidence to the police while I made a phone call. I picked up my phone and dialed my sister Nadine. When she answered, I told her everything. The email, the insurance policy, the cut brake lines, the 2 years of lies I had been too blind to see. She did not say, I told you so. She just said, I'm on my way. Detective Alma Reyes came to my hospital room that evening. She was a serious woman in her mid-40s with short, dark hair, sharp eyes, and a manner that told me she had seen terrible things and was no longer surprised by any of them. She pulled a chair next to my bed, took out a small notebook, and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I told her about Wesley. I told her how we met, how he charmed me, how he slowly became part of every aspect of my life. I told her about the email I had seen on his laptop, the one that mentioned the Jenna situation, and promised that he would have access to everything within a month. I told her about the life insurance policy he had convinced me to sign, the savings account he had taken over, the passwords and PIN numbers I had given him without a second thought. I told her about Oscar's phone call the night before the accident, and how I had ignored his warning because I did not want to believe that the man I loved could hurt me. Detective Reyes listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question. Did Wesley know you had taken your car to Oscar's shop? I thought about it. Wesley had driven me to the shop both times. He had waited in the parking lot while I talked to Oscar inside. He had asked questions about what was being repaired and how long it would take. Yes, he knew exactly where my car was. The detective nodded and wrote something in her notebook. She told me she would be in touch and left the room without making any promises. But I could see in her eyes that she believed me. Over the next 3 days, the investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Reyes obtained security footage from a gas station located a quarter-mile from Oscar's shop. The footage showed a man matching Wesley's description walking toward the shop at 2:14 in the morning, 2 nights before the accident. Oscar had fixed my brakes during the day. Someone had come back in the middle of the night to undo his work. The detective also pulled Wesley's financial records, and what she found explained everything. Wesley was not the successful financial advisor he had pretended to be. He was drowning in debt from gambling and bad investments. He had been stealing from his clients for years, moving money between accounts to cover his tracks, living a lifestyle he could not afford. His firm had started asking questions. An audit was scheduled for the following month. Wesley was weeks away from being exposed and losing everything. The life insurance policy he had convinced me to sign was worth $300,000. That money would have given him a way out. He could have paid off his debts, disappeared before the audit, and started over somewhere new. All he needed was for me to die in what looked like an accident on a dangerous mountain road. And Kristen, the woman from the email, was not a client. She was his real girlfriend. They had been together for 4 years, since before Wesley ever met me. I was never his partner. I was never his future. I was his escape plan. Detective Reyes arrested Wesley at his office on a Thursday afternoon. My sister Nadine was there. She stood across the street and recorded the whole thing on her phone. She told me later that Wesley looked genuinely shocked when the officers put him in handcuffs, like he could not believe his plan had failed. He denied everything at first, then tried to blame Kristen, then demanded a lawyer. The police found tools in his apartment that matched the cuts on my brake lines. They found messages on his phone discussing the timeline of my death, messages where he and Kristen talked about what they would do with the insurance money once I was gone. 2 weeks after the arrest, I went to Wesley's arraignment hearing. I sat in the gallery with Nadine beside me, her hand gripping mine. When they brought Wesley into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, I barely recognized him. The charm was gone. The easy smile was gone. He looked pale and tired and ordinary, like the mask he had worn for 2 years had finally slipped away. He saw me sitting there and his face changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes went cold. He mouthed 2 words at me from across the room. "You're lucky." I stared back at him without looking away. I was not lucky. I was warned. I was saved by a mechanic who paid attention when no one else did. I was saved by my own instinct to steer into that embankment instead of trying to make a turn I could never have made. Wesley did not make me lucky. He made me a survivor, and he was going to spend the rest of his life paying for what he tried to do. The judge denied bail. Wesley was led out of the courtroom in chains. I watched him disappear through a side door, and I felt something shift inside my chest. The fear that had been sitting there for weeks finally started to loosen. He could not hurt me anymore. He could not lie to me anymore. It was over. Nadine squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let's go home." I stood up and walked out of that courtroom without looking back. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Wesley's lawyer tried everything to create reasonable doubt. He argued that the security footage was grainy, that the tools in Wesley's apartment were common items anyone could own, that the messages on his phone were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. Oscar testified about the cut brake lines and showed the jury the photographs he had taken. Detective Reyes walked them through the financial records, the insurance policy, the months of planning that led to that morning on the mountain road. I took the stand and told them about the email I had seen, about the warnings I had ignored, about the moment the brake pedal went to the floor, and I realized I was going to die. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Wesley guilty on all counts: attempted murder, insurance fraud, multiple charges of financial crimes against his clients. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in state prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 15. I was sitting in the front row when the sentence was announced. Wesley did not look at me. He stared straight ahead with no expression on his face, like he had already checked out of his own life. Kristen was charged as an accessory to attempted murder. Prosecutors proved that she knew about Wesley's plan and helped him research how to disable a car's braking system without leaving obvious evidence. She pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and received 8 years. I never saw her face in person. I only know what she looks like from photographs the detective showed me. She was pretty in a sharp, careful way. I wondered sometimes if she ever thought about me, if she ever felt guilty about what they tried to do. Probably not. People like her and Wesley do not think about the people they hurt. They only think about what they want. The physical injuries healed faster than I expected. My wrist took 3 months to fully recover. The scar on my forehead faded over time to a thin white line that I can cover with makeup if I choose to. Most days I do not bother. It reminds me that I survived something I was not supposed to survive. The emotional damage took much longer. For almost a year, I had nightmares about that mountain road. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, my foot pressing down on an imaginary brake pedal that did nothing. I started seeing a therapist who specializes in trauma, a patient woman named Dr. Reese, who taught me how to separate the past from the present. Slowly, I learned to drive again without panic attacks. Slowly, I learned to trust my own judgment again. My sister Nadine and I are closer now than we have ever been. I apologized to her for all the years I dismissed her warnings, for choosing Wesley over my own family. She told me she had forgiven me a long time ago, that she was just grateful I was still alive to have this conversation. We have dinner together every Sunday now. She is the first person I call when something happens, good or bad. I will never take her for granted again. A month after the trial ended, I drove to Oscar's shop with a bottle of whiskey and a card I had spent hours writing. I wanted to thank him properly for saving my life. He waved off my gratitude and said he was just doing his job, that anyone would have done the same thing. But his son Marco told me later that Oscar had barely slept for days after he discovered the cut brake lines. He blamed himself for not doing more, for not calling the police immediately, for not physically stopping me from driving that morning. I found Oscar in the garage, working on someone's engine. I told him that his phone call was the reason I am alive. I told him that when my brakes failed, his voice was in my head telling me something was wrong. That warning made me steer into the embankment instead of trying to make the curve. His words saved me even when I did not listen to them. Oscar wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me for a long moment. "I'm just glad you're okay, Miss Jenna. That's all that matters." I still take my car to his shop every 3 months, whether it needs work or not. He checks everything twice now. So do I. I am 30 years old. I still work at the animal hospital. I still live in my little cottage on the edge of town. I am not dating anyone right now, and I am at peace with that. I spent a long time learning to trust myself again before I could even think about trusting someone else. Someday I might be ready, but I am not in a hurry. What I learned from Wesley is that some people are very good at pretending to be what you need. They study you, learn your weaknesses, and make themselves so important that you cannot imagine life without them. By the time the truth starts breaking through, you are so deep in the lie that seeing it clearly feels like losing everything. I know now that losing a lie is not the same as losing something real. It just feels that way at first. I used to ignore the people who tried to warn me because their words were inconvenient. I told myself they were jealous or paranoid or did not understand. I will never make that mistake again. The people who love you tell you hard truths because they want you to be safe. The people who want something from you tell you what you want to hear. Oscar taught me that the people who seem the least important in your life are sometimes the ones paying the most attention. A quiet mechanic in a small shop cared more about my safety than the man who slept beside me every night. I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.